in our journey through the book of Galatians, and like we've been doing for all the weeks, we're going to first break off into our groups. All right, so question one in our groups was, describe a time when you were close to God. What were you doing? What was life like for you at that time? And contrast that to a time where you were struggling to experience God. What were you doing then, and what was your life like? So these questions we're asking you, like challenging us to just kind of explain like a time where we felt like close to God. And you know, the group I was participating in, was kind of hearing what others were saying in the group next to us. Most were probably describing or sharing a time where there's a certain like spiritual practices that were going on in their life. We also, I heard people describing like, you know, either I was on a mission trip, and while I was on the mission trip, you know, the consistency of prayer, the time we were reading the Bible, going out into the mission field, seeing God's hand, you know, it made me feel like I was close to God. Also, in the times that we experience, like sometimes when we experience like difficult times, those are times that generally bring us to our knees. And when we're on our knees and praying and asking for God, those are times that we feel God, or we feel close to Him, or we feel His presence. And those are important, right? It's important to be able to have that, because when you go to share your faith, that is what you will speak of. And kind of compare it to this. Okay, what's the difference between a travel agent and a tour guide? Travel agent, you go and you book your vacation with a travel agent. They tell you that like, Hawaii is really good this time of year, this hotel, like it's really nice. I get a lot of good like reviews on this hotel from, you know, customers that I've sent there and so on. And while you're there, you should really take the road to Hana, and it's really nice, and so on. So like a travel agent would be able to kind of point you in a certain direction and say like, this is probably good, these are good recommendations. Have some experience, but really their experience is limited. Versus a tour guide, like when you get to the place that you're going, a tour guide takes you on a trip that they have been on over and over and over. And because they have been on the trip over and over and over, they're very good at taking you on this trip. Like you're walking and they say, okay, when we come around the corner, I want you to look straight up because this is going to be a rare bird that we always know is there. All right? If you were walking on your own, you'd miss the bird. All right? And the tour guide would say, like, let's not go to this place during this time, like the eggs aren't so good, let's come back at noon, the eggs are much better, like at noon. So a tour guide is somebody that walks with you and out of their own experience shares with you the best practices, the best way to experience wherever it is you're at, all right? And so when we are sharing God with other people, we need to share Him from the point of view of tour guides. Of like, God was with me, and I experienced Him in this way, and therefore, like, I can tell you, hold on a little bit. Okay, we need to be tour guides. Another way that we tend to look at it, I'll throw another one, is what about like, we look at people who tell us about God, and we look at like scholars and theologians, all right? So a scholar we look at and be like, all right, this is somebody who has like very much so read about God. He has read commentaries or even written commentaries, very well versed in the Bible. But we know that there are scholars who have no experience with God. And we can see that in the way that they write. The way that they write is just tainted a little bit because they're lacking that experience with God. Versus on the other hand, like theologian. We look at theologian and be like, wow, theologian, like they know what they're talking about, all right? Theologians. And like being a theologian, like if I look at anybody right here and say like, are you a theologian? Myself included, be like, no, I'm not a theologian, like this theologian. I'm not a theologian, all right? But as I was reading in a book recently, I read this quote, which made me feel better about myself. All right? You can be a true theologian in the Orthodox Church and yet be mentally retarded. Because true theology is not defined by the acuity of the rational mind, but by the quality of prayer of the heart. Okay, Father Andrew Stephen Damick in his book Orthodoxy and Heterodoxy had this quote. So we can all be theologians, all right? We can all be theologians because theology is an encounter with God. Theology is an encounter with God. It's a personal encounter with God. It's not about how much knowledge we have of God, but it's about the encounter with God. It's about the relationship with God. And so all of us have the ability, and to some degree, are theologians. As we have had an experience with God, as we have had an encounter with God, we have theology to share. All right? At the recent conference that I was at, the evangelism conference, one of the other fathers there was talking about theology from this perspective, and he gave us this quote of Evagrius of Pontus, where he says, "If you are a theologian, you will pray truly. If you pray truly, you will be a theologian." And so it's an interesting sentence, because it was pretty much saying, if you're a theologian, you pray. And we know that when we pray, we communicate with God. And every relationship requires communication. And so if we're a theologian, which is an encounter with God, we will be praying because we encounter God through prayer. And if we really pray, okay, then we're actually a theologian because we are encountering God. And so in most of the circumstances that probably were shared in the groups of when was I close to God, prayer was probably one of the things that we were doing. And while we were praying earnestly in whatever situation we're in, we were becoming theologians. But at the conference, because it was an evangelism conference, we tweaked it. We modified it to say if you are a theologian, you evangelize truly. If you evangelize truly, you'll be a theologian. All right? So what are we saying here? That if you're a theologian, you've had an encounter with God. And if you had a close encounter with God, what will you do? You will share your encounter with other people. You will evangelize with other people. And even if you just think of yourself as an evangelist, well, what does an evangelist do? He shares of the gospel. How would he share the gospel? Of his experience with God. So it's one in the same way. So we see that our relationship with God is extremely important. And God is extremely relational. Even when you look at the Trinity by itself, it is a relationship of three persons. It is highly relational. And so God wants us to be in a relationship with Him. He wants us to encounter Him. And in our encounter with God, through our relationship, we become theologians, regardless of what our IQ otherwise says. All right? So St. Paul was starting to paint a picture of what it was of this relationship. And in verses 4 and 6, he says, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive the adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent forth the Spirit of His Son into your hearts, crying out, Abba, Father. One of the things that uniquely separates Christianity from all other world religions is God's fatherhood to us. One of the things that separates Christianity from nearly every other world religion is God's fatherhood. No other world religion comes to their God, respectively, and addresses them as Father. And Father is a special word. You don't use Father for everybody. Okay? And I know and I'm saying that I know my name is Father David, okay? But you don't when people say Father David, they're not approaching me as their father, so to speak. It's kind of like a title, it's a role that I play, it's part of my calling. But when you think of the word Father, you think of your Father, which is a relational, it's a very close relationship to your heart. It's a very special relationship. Because you know that, like, in families, ain't nobody knows how you talk to your father except your other family members. All right? And you don't go spreading around how you talk with your parents. Like, that's not always public knowledge. That's a very special relationship that comes with a special mode of communication. Special emotions are poured out into that relationship. Special experiences make that relationship very tight, and unfortunately, on the opposite end, circumstances can break that relationship as well. But when we look at, like, father or even mother, really, like, we're talking about a very, very near relationship to our heart. And that's one of the things that differentiates Christianity from every other world religion. And Jesus made a big deal out of this because he himself, in John 14, verse 6, he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Jesus made a very exclusive claim that is radically different from every current thought in society. If you look at Buddhists and Hindus, they look and pride themselves almost on multiple ways of finding God. Islam would find the statement that Jesus made, to be blasphemous, making himself to be the Son of God and saying that I am the only way to the Father. It's a blasphemous statement. So Jesus, by this statement, is stating that, one, it's an exclusive path, and the path comes through me, and the path leads to God, but we are going to say that God is a Father. You're not going to this entity that is so distant from you. We're going to this person who identifies himself as a father. And with that fatherhood comes a special relationship. With that fatherhood comes a special way of communicating, just like we would in our own families. But aside from really focusing on the fatherhood, or in addition to focusing on the fatherhood, St. Paul said in verse 7, "Therefore you are no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, then an heir to God through Christ." Any father who has an inheritance to pass on to a son, or a daughter, or a child, right, is going to raise that child with special attention. A father who wants to pass on their inheritance to their child is going to raise that child with such special attention, with such attention to detail. And really the detail that that a father pays attention to the details of the heart. So in the relationship that we have with our Father, and through that relationship, He is raising us. He wants to raise us in a certain way to become like Him, to enjoy the inheritance that He has for us. He takes a very hands-on approach to raising us. He takes a very hands-on approach to raising us. He takes a hands-on approach to raising us through the mission trips we go. He takes a hands-on approach to raising us through the difficulties that we face. He takes a hands-on approach to raising us when we feel lost in life. That's His hands-on approach. It's through those situations. Because He sees Himself as a father. He wants us to approach Him as a father. And so when we look at this relationship as a father-child relationship, it comes with its own set of, ways of dealing with each other. And that truly separates Christianity from all other religions in the world. That when we deal with our God, we deal with Him as a father. The only thing is sometimes we win battles against our earthly fathers, but He's always right in this situation. All right? Our distance that we frequently experience from God is oftentimes due to a lack of experience with God. We're lacking experience with God. We're lacking in our prayer life. We're lacking in seeing the challenges before me as God's way of communicating with me, of His actual hand in my life. And we look at it and say like, God, you are distant, therefore I don't have like good things. But God is saying, no, because you have this, I am trying to tell you that I am actually very, very much so present in what's going on. But when we're not praying, we're not able to see the hand of God in those situations. And so when we lack, like a lot of times when we feel that distance with God, it's because we're lacking an experiential relationship with God. In part 2 of that question, as I was sharing with you, like when we struggle to experience God, what happens when we struggle to experience God? Well, we go back to the things that we know. We go back to what we know. And one of the things, like a picture or a story that really captures this, is after the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and after he had appeared to the disciples, and then again, when Thomas was there, he left and he went about doing different things. And the disciples, although had seen the Lord, are still struggling with what's going on right now. His death and his resurrection, and then the talk of the ascension to come, and then the Holy Spirit. Like, they're still putting together a picture of what's going on. And so, for the last 3.5 years, these 12 men had a very, very personal and close connection with God, a close relationship with God. And now all of a sudden, with Jesus, and now all of a sudden Jesus is he rose from the dead, but he's out and about and doing different things. And so Peter's struggling with this. Peter's struggling with okay, he was here, and then he died, and then he rose, and then he's leaving again. Like, I don't know what to do with this. I'm used to I walk with Jesus, that's what I do. But then, as Jesus was creating distance, between him and his disciples, before his ascension, Peter had to, he was figuring out what to do. And so Simon Peter said, I'm going fishing. I'm going fishing. And they, or James and John, said, we're going with him. So what happens to us when we feel that distance from God? When we aren't in that relationship with God, we go back to the things that we know. We resort to old behaviors. We resort to addictions. We resort to trying to figure things out on our own. We go back to what we know. But Jesus knew this, and Jesus came back to them, and in a very similar way, he said, look, you've been fishing, you don't catch anything, cast your nets on the other side. They caught, and then what had happened? Therefore the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. Now Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord. He put on his outer garment, because he had removed it, and he plunged into the sea. What happened? It was an experience with God. Jesus had come back. They had experienced his hand in their life. And immediately, Peter plunged into the sea and knew what had happened. He knew that in the distance, he went back to what he was used to. But through the relationship and through the experience of God's hand, he jumped and he made a move for the Lord. So St. Paul was surprised at the Galatians that they went back. The Galatians were people who heard the faith, experienced it, and were moving in the right direction, but then Judaizers came in and started to contort the way that they were to experience God and the rules that they needed to follow to experience God. And St. Paul was telling the Galatians, we went through this. We talked about the relationship. We talked about walking by faith. We talked about the promise. Why are you turning from a relationship back to your old ways? And he says this in verse 9, where he says, but after you have known God, or rather are known by God, how is it that you turn again to the weak and beggarly elements to which you desire again to be in bondage? He's surprised. He's looking at him saying, focus on the relationship. Trust in the relationship. Trust in the promise that he has given you. Don't resort back to what you don't to the things that you're comfortable with, but the things that you're comfortable with are the things that have put you in bondage. And St. Paul starts to recall with them, and he said, when I first came to you, and my trial which was in my flesh, you did not despise or reject, but you received me as an angel of God, even as Christ Jesus. So St. Paul is bringing to their memory, like, remember when I came to you, and I was struggling, and I had an ailment? You treated me with love. Most people would see somebody who has a disease or an infirmity and stay away. I don't want to be unclean. And I don't want to get, it's messy, like, stay away. But you took me in. You loved me. When nobody else wanted to love me, you loved me. And he also says, like, and if you could, you would have plucked out your own eye and given it to me. Which is why we think that St. Paul, the infirmity, had to do something with his eye, from this verse, but that's not the point of what we're saying. And so what St. Paul is bringing to their mind is that you experience God through a relationship, through pouring love on somebody else, through going outside of yourself and caring for somebody who needed to be cared for. You experience God in that relationship. But now, you're turning back to old things. You're turning back to old behaviors. And he says, and because of the experience that St. Paul has with Galatians, because it was an experience through an infirmity and through preaching, it allowed them to develop a close relationship. We know that, like, when we walk with people through something difficult, it kind of brings us into a closer relationship. And when we have a closer relationship, we're able to kind of speak the truth easier. Like, and St. Paul, because of the love that he experienced from them and the love that he poured onto them, his relationship with the church of Galatia was close. And so when they got out of line, he had kind of the moral ground in which to come back and say, you're getting out of line. And I'm worried about you. He had to speak harshly to them. And in verses 16 and the 19 and 20, he says, have I therefore become your enemies because I tell you the truth? My little children, for whom I labor in birth again until Christ is formed in you. I would like to be present with you now and to change my tone, for I have doubts about you. St. Paul, what most commentaries are saying, like, he's tough on the Galatians. He's worried about them because they're falling away from this relationship with God. And they're falling into such a legalistic view of their relationship with God. But it's only when we kind of have that emotional real estate with others through experiences that we're able to kind of give and take. We're able to give it, like, hard sometimes and speak harshly to somebody, but then also receive. Like, we're more receptive to receive from those who are poured into us. And so understanding that dynamic in relationship is important, because when we feel God pouring into us through the difficult times in life and helping us out, we kind of have like a good bank account, so to speak, with God. And when God comes later on to come and correct us, we're more receptive to what he's saying because we have felt his hand, we have experienced it. And we know that as a father, he's working to bring us to, like, become, step into the air or step into the inheritance that he wants. He's training us, he's forming us. So question 2 was, if someone asked you to explain what it means to be a son or daughter of a bondwoman versus that of a free woman, what would you say? And I'll tell you where this question came from. So during the Galatians challenge, I played the book of Galatians in my car and I listened to it. And I was playing, and Elijah was my son was in the back seat, and he heard Galatians chapter 4. Next morning, we were driving to school, and we were running late, so we were praying in the car. And he's saying, please, God, help me to not live as the bondwoman, but live as the free woman. Daddy, what does that mean? And I'm like, we're almost at school, Elijah. I'm gonna have to. So like, it kind of caught me off guard. And so I was just like, how do you explain what it is to live like it's not a bondwoman, but a free woman? The Bible talks about it. St. Paul talks about it. So when we think about like promises or like a free woman, all right? The way St. Paul says it, but he who is of the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and he of the free woman through promise. Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are children of promises. Verse 23 and 28, I combine the two. When we think about like the bondwoman first, the bondwoman is a reference to Hagar, who was Sarah's maidservant, who when Abraham and Sarah kept on hearing like, you will have a son, struggled to reason through it. Sarah's like, okay, I'm 75, I'm way past that age of bearing children, and Abraham was nearing 100, and so they were struggling with how this promise was ever going to come to be. So what was their mind? Like their mind was bound by the laws of the physical body. They're like, it can't happen. Like, I can't have a child. So their thinking and their actions were dictated by the laws of the physical body. That Sarah's womb was dead. Abraham was old. And so, in order to make God's promise come to fruition, they took matters into their own hand. And Sarah gave Hagar, her maidservant, to Abraham, and they had a son, Ishmael. But God said, no, I promise you, I will give you a son, and your son will be from you and Sarah. And so when we look at this promise from God, it's a promise that something will happen that you cannot do. It's a promise that something will happen that you cannot do. You cannot all of a sudden bring life to Sarah's womb. So when we experience a promise from God, we have to realize that when God makes a promise, He's not looking at kind of like the resources that we have here on earth. He's not bound to fulfill His promises by the resources that we have here on earth. He is infinite in His resources and infinite in His ways. So He's not bound. And when He makes a promise, in order to make sure that we know that the promise is coming from Him, the promise will have to be fulfilled by other means. The promise will have to be fulfilled by other means. And so He makes it on an impossible situation to us, but a very possible situation to Him. So we need to realize that God will not use conventional ways in order to keep His promise. Abraham tried to make God's promise come through in conventional ways, and Ishmael was a sign of that. It was a sign of the captivity of his mind, of living based on like what he saw, based on living by reason, based on like through a legalistic lens, so to speak. But St. Paul, in his book to the Galatians, his letter to the Galatians, is trying to free us from the legalism of it, and trying to bring us into a freer way of living. And so he's using this as an example, and he's saying like Isaac was a symbol that God would be able to bring life out of the deadness of Sarah's womb. He's promising, I will bring life out of what is dead. Which our freedom that St. Paul is talking about is God bringing life out of our dead way of living, out of our fallen nature, out of how sin has woven itself into my mind and my heart. And as St. Paul said at the very beginning, like we live in an evil generation, and the evil generation is a product of evil people, fallen people within this world. God is saying it is impossible for evil to produce good. So I will come in to what is evil and bring out life. Only I can do it, so therefore I will promise you that I will do it. And so, in God's promise to us to be free, He is freeing us from kind of like our fallen way of thinking. He's freeing us from having to find righteousness out of an impossible situation. He's freeing us from having to fulfill certain legalistic, check marks in order to actually be in a relationship with Him. And He's freeing us to actually step into a relationship with a Father, not with a God who looks for check marks. And the example that Paul was giving us through the bondwoman and the son of promise was just another example that God is saying, like, I promise that I will bring you from death into life. Only I can do it, and I'm not requiring, the one thing I require is that you believe in me, and that you trust in me, and that in that belief and in that trust, what will happen? We develop a relationship with the Father. We experience the hand of the Father. I wasn't able to explain all that on the way to school. I really had to think about it and read some more about it. But it's good to challenge ourselves, to look at the examples that the Bible is giving and saying, like, well, can we explain it? Because you never know who will ask you to explain what, at what time. All right? But we got to be ready. Any questions? All right, so next week, no City Salt. We got some great and exciting news to share for the community. All right, so I'll see everybody here next week, and we're going to enjoy next week. We'll stand up and pray. And the week after, Father Mark Aziz will be doing chapter 5. And then the week after that, when I get back, I'll be finishing off our series on Galatians on chapter 6. So we'll pray. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Thank you, Lord, for your blessings. Thank you for this day, for the chance to come together and before you. To realize, Lord, that you have promised us to bring life out of what is dead. That by our sins and our fallen nature, Lord, we are helpless. We cannot get to the righteousness that you desire for us by ourselves. You have freed us of having to accomplish that by ourselves. And you have instead given us the power of your Holy Spirit to do that which we cannot by ourselves. Lord, help us to see all the situations in life as sacred, to see that it's your hand in the midst of those situations that is allowing us to experience you, to rejoice in you, to understand what it is to truly have a Father who will do everything to prepare us for the inheritance that you desire to give us. Truly, Lord, we are blessed to be able to call you Father, and to be able to draw so close to you. Because so many of us, and actually all of us, are in need of your Father. And you have given it to us for free. You have given it to us out of purely your love for us. And in your sessions, Lord, it seems to please you from the beginning. Here it says we say, our Father, Lord in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Punish us as we and love of the Father, grace of His only begotten Son, our Lord God and Savior Jesus Christ, who gives the Holy Spirit, who will give you all peace, the Lord.